Hello there, ladies and gentlemen, this is Orphan Last, aka Skylar Madison, and today I have a multitude of things going on in this video. First of all, I'm doing a giveaway in the form of an art competition. Second of all, I will be detailing what you need to do in order to submit your artwork correctly, the rules and all of that good stuff. Third, I will be illustrating half of an image in this video, and on the cutoff date, on that following Friday, I'll announce the winners and the video will contain footage of me finishing this image. The image in this video that I'm going to be working on is promotional material for OUTBUDDIES. It is a commission. I feel it's important to inform you all that I am not an entry into the competition and I am not trying to set expectations. If you envision the characters and the world that Julian Laffer made differently, go ahead and make your image different. Fourth, I will also be discussing the game a little bit. And fifth, I'll be discussing what I was thinking while making the image that I'll be working on in this video. For those of you that don't know, OUTBUDDIES is a video game that looks and plays remarkably like Metroid. A video game and a genre that I think harkens back to the early days of our youth. Since Nintendo absolutely refuses to make another Metroid game, some independent developers have tried to release sequels or remakes and such like that, regardless of the fact that by traditional copyright laws, the game would already have entered into the public domain. But the laws have changed in favor of the corporate interests in this case, rather than the public. And those developers have been sued. OUTBUDDIES, however, is its own intellectual property, and unlike Metroid, which randomly has the same enemies popping into every game for no explainable reason other than it's a Metroid game, OUTBUDDIES excels at going its own route with its story, and it is dramatically different. The enemies you fight are unique, and the first enemies you encounter may not be difficult, but they do get you to think a little bit strategically. Your character even has a morph ball ability later on in the game. You can even play this game co-op with a second player. When the game starts to pick up, it starts getting into the awesome category, and I'm not just saying that. I love this game. This whole thing, it's my labor of love for this game and wanting to see a sequel. So why would you guys want to compete in my art competition? Well, I have 3 CD keys for OUTBUDDIES, so in other words, I have 3 copies of OUTBUDDIES that I'll be giving out to the winners of this competition. Should the winner not want or need the game, then there will be more than 3 winners, if that's the case. Why would that happen? Well, some people are hardcore gamers but only have a console, like an Xbox or a PlayStation. And OUTBUDDIES is only available on Steam at this point in time. Some people only have a Linux operating system, or generally, some people may not watch my content on a computer and might not even own one. The list kind of goes on. In order to enter into the competition, you need to jump into my Discord server.
A link is supplied in the video description below.
Go to the Share Your Work channel and submit the image that you want to have entered into this competition with your name or online username and the social media links you'd like me to use in order to promote you in some way. If it doesn't have a signature of some sort or social media links or isn't in the Share Your Work channel in the Discord server, then it will unfortunately be disqualified. Trust me, it sounds a lot more complex than it really is. The artwork must be OUTBUDDIES related. No crossover universe stuff with other intellectual properties or universes or whatever, or your original characters. Yeah, none of that. The image must be related to the game OUTBUDDIES and must feature the main character, Nikolai Bernstein, and his floating robotic companion, Buddy. It must have those 2 characters in the image. And if you've never heard of or never seen the game OUTBUDDIES, or you've never played it, that's fine. You can still earn the game with a few carefully placed image searches in order to research the visual look and feel of the game, such as the various environments from the Mayan-inspired architectural structures to the plant life with blue glowing orbs for fruit, the various opponents you'll encounter in the game and what they look like, glowing purple and blue vines going through the blue soil, red soil cracked up from dehydration, all the way down to finding what the main character, Nikolai Bernstein, and his companion Buddy look like. Unfortunately, there is no beginner or intermediate category for this competition. I only have 3 games to hand out to the first, second, and third place winner. But don't feel discouraged. Having an art competition is something new to my channel. And for all you know, everyone who will enter into this competition might be a beginner level artist. I honestly don't know. Maybe in the future I'll be a little bit like Jazza and be able to offer you guys a Wacom or something, but I think if you have a high cost item as an award, people lose track of it being a fun social interaction and just focus on the prizes. So maybe it's a good thing that this is just a really cool game.
And all submissions must be submitted by the 27th of November 2019.
So you have close to 1 month to start and finish this image. It's way more time than I've ever had in order to do an art competition, and I hope you all the best with it. Okay, so let's get into drawing this thing. So on the screen right now you see a collection of images, and these images are basically being used as promotional material for the game. The main character getting a red suit was implemented rather late in the game's development. He used to have a gray outfit, but at the last moment it was changed to red. Not so much for it to look more like a Metroid clone, but more so to raise the visibility of the character because he was blending into the background. I'm happy with that change. But some of the promotional material still shows Nikolai Bernstein in a gray suit, and this can cause what's called brand confusion. The existing promotional material with the gray suit is awesomely executed. It looks great, it has the Mayan architecture, but the enemies are the size of frogs, and in the game they're twice as tall as you, the character, and something to fear. One of these crab-like creatures is easy to handle, but 2 or 3 of these crab-like creatures together are a force to be reckoned with. But he also doesn't look anything like how he does in the game in any of these promotional images. He looks a little bit more like a ghost in one of them. But to compound the brand confusion, we do have an image with the main character in a red suit with a number of bosses that you'll fight throughout the game. The execution of this image is rather good, but the art style doesn't quite look like it fits. It looks like album art for something that's like an album that's come out for the 70s or 80s, and it's for a band whose drug of choice is LSD. That's kind of what this image kind of reminds me of. And if it was trying to advertise that, then it would totally fit and work as a commercial product. But not for this game, I don't think. Basically what I'm saying is that when you put these 2 images together, you'd never guess that they're related. You'd never guess that the character in the diving suit, in the gray, and in one image, and the character in the diving suit in the red, you'd never assume that that's the same person, or that Buddy in either image is the same robot. One looks like a cool adventure in a Mayan temple, and the other looks like artwork you'd expect to promote the Beatles' Yellow Submarine cartoon. That right there is brand confusion. Just looking at these 2 images, you'd never guess that they're related other than the title OUTBUDDIES somewhere printed on the composition. And even, unfortunately, the font doesn't match in either one of these images. Though these 2 concept images are great, I don't feel they work in promoting the product. But fortunately, the only artwork we see promoting the game on Steam currently is a screenshot of one of the animated cutscenes in the game. So that seems to be checking out quite well in terms of brand identity. You're able to associate the visuals with the game because it's coming from the game. What's strange is that one of the things that I like about Nikolai Bernstein after having played the game is that he looks similar enough to 2 iconic characters in order to stand out. He looks a little bit like Mario, a little bit like Samus, and you know what? There's actually a small touch of Tony Stark, so all of the iconic imagery is there. It just needs to be utilized in a way that kind of grabs people's attention a little bit more and keeps it. from one promotional image to the other. One of the ways that Julian said he wanted Nikolai Bernstein to look was similar to Jeff Bridges, which is kind of cool. I also pulled some images that were used to promote Metroid games and immediately found an iconic image that I wanted to somewhat copy. In the end, I think the final composition wound up looking distinctly different, but yet you can actually see the inspiration. And also, I pulled in a few other inspirational images from Metroid as well, but not really so much for reference. But at this point I was posed with the question, what would a male Samus sort of character look like if he's not quite in the same universe as Metroid? Julian supplied me with this science fiction looking diving suit, and I used it quite a bit in my efforts to make the character. But I really gravitated towards the StarCraft's Terran marine armor. Maybe something big, meaty, and bulky might be of interest, and Julian seemed to like that idea quite a bit. So these are the sorts of reference images that I've gone after, and if you're finding problems with getting started, you're not alone. I was totally intimidated with this image. So in Affinity Photo, the first thing that I set out to do was creating gestural drawings and a general background painting. Sometimes it takes a long time to find a way to get your flat, scratchy lines on a flat piece of paper to translate into being a 3D object that you'll build upon later. But I think I came up with an interesting pose. The next thing that I did was I established my perspective grid, and I settled with a 270-degree viewing angle for this image. It's a panoramic image, at least to some extent. However, early on, I really didn't use the perspective grid that much, and I was kind of baffled at what I was even doing. It took a long time for me to figure out when I was going to use the perspective grid and how I was going to use it. The first enemy that cements itself into your mind that's purely original aren't the little wall-crawling creatures, but these dark crab-looking creatures with red eyes. So I decided to make Nikolai's opponent be the first major threat in the game. So I decided to draw Nikolai's first opponent, his first big threat in the game. We're not wanting spoilers for the game in the image. For the background, I didn't base the location on a real location that's in the game, like I did with the Hollow Knight fan art piece that I did a few months ago. Instead, the left side of the screen has these two waterfalls and a tube attached to the top of the cavern on the ceiling. So this left side of the composition is definitely inspired by the room where you encounter your first save point in the game. It's not exact, but I didn't feel like it needed to be. For the red right side of the composition, I wanted to show a hint of an intimidating environment that's just beyond. And that area is also based off of a location that's in the game itself, and I feel this worked out just fine. I want this image to make you want to run into the red cavern portion of the scene and generally inspire the feeling of exploration, because that's what the Metroidvania games are all about. You know how on the internet you can sometimes find these differently stylized images of Mario and Luigi as if the images were concept images for a Mario Bros. Game for an older generation. I sort of wanted to make artwork for OUTBUDDIES that kind of fell within that realm of appeal. I don't know if I necessarily succeeded, but there's a decent number of things to look at and enjoy in the composition. The problem with the gestural color silhouette background that I drew out initially was that by the time that I figured out how the perspective in the scene was oriented, it wound up shifting a little bit. The scene's compositional elements just moved a little bit. But I was okay with that because the only thing that the colored silhouette background was used for was to inspire me to understand the composition. With the silhouette background, I was able to give myself an idea as to what the lighting of the scene should be, at least to some extent. So although this workflow might need some adjustment later on down the road, I do feel as though this was a good way to build up a composition. Once I had a good idea about everything in the composition, everything's placement and such, I just felt like it was time to refine Nikolai. In the cutscenes for the game, the helmet looked mostly like StarCraft's helmet. In fact, throughout the game itself and the gameplay, it looks like a round dome on his head. Close enough that it might be believable that this is his suit. I studied the Jeff Bridges face and the face that was already established in the opening cutscene of the game and tried to come up with something for Nikolai's face. Ultimately, I'm hoping no one thinks that this looks like Dr. Robotnik or something from Sonic the Hedgehog. I really hope that doesn't happen. It's at this point that I started to draw heaviest on the yellow scuba suit, but only a few remnants of the reference actually made it into the final image. There's things that are inspired by it, but no one would ever look at the two images and say, oh yeah, he was heavily influenced by this yellow suit. I guess the kneecap is the thing that looks the most similar to the yellow suit. That's what I was kind of going after, at least to some extent, but I didn't want the clothing, the actual cloth from the yellow suit. I figured that Nikolai is traveling into dangerous territory, so what's most important is armor, safety, being able to have a suit that's able to withstand extreme depths of the ocean, that sort of thing. At this point, I started to peg down what the perspective in the scene was a little bit. I remembered that I didn't have any Mayan architecture in the image, and at work during my day job, as luck would have it, I'm researching Mayan architecture right now. So I really didn't need to have a reference when drawing this structure. I more so implied Mayan architecture. I didn't really draw in any hieroglyphics or glyphs or anything like that, but the feeling is all that I really need. Then I started really giving the background some love, just refining the color silhouettes that I made earlier into detailed line work. I started a bit of the work on the vines, considering the work that I was doing at that moment in time was more of a gestural sketch for those vines. I figured that's what I was doing at that point. Later on, when I come back to ink those vines, things wind up coming together quite nicely. And I'm okay with some of my line work to look a little bit scratchy on plant life, primarily because nature is full of all sorts of snaggletooth looking textures. So I'm okay with a tree or a vine, the bark or whatever, to look a little scraggly. If everything just always looks perfect, with every single line just a perfect crisp line, everything will look like it's made out of plastic. And inside of side-scrollers, there will oftentimes be something like a waterfall coming from literally nowhere. It's just, there's this waterfall that you get to walk by. But while drawing the image, it got me thinking I should be able to see where this water is coming from. It's not a stretch to say that the caves were manufactured by either the Wozan, which is a group of people that you run into in the game, or the ancient gods discussed inside of the intro of the game. So I decided some device would be pouring the water out that's attached to the ceiling. Once I felt like the background was fleshed out with line work in a satisfying way, I turned the opacity on the background way down and began working on the crab creature. I wound up adjusting the position of the crab monster a number of times before committing to the next step after the gestural drawing. I didn't really change much, but one of my favorite foods out there is crab, and I have noticed a few things about a crab's exoskeleton while eating them. Sounds weird, but I make observations all the time that can help me draw, and this has helped me draw this guy and make him look the way I need. And Julian said that he loves how this crab-like creature has an eagerness to kill. At least those are his words, not mine. One of the things that I kept forgetting about the composition was Buddy. So I moved his position in the scene to be in a brighter part of the composition and fleshed him out quite a bit. The most difficult thing at this point was that Buddy takes up just a tiny number of pixels, so it became pretty clear early on that I needed to ink this in Affinity Designer, which takes longer. But it always makes the finalized line work look really sleek. I decided that since Buddy can do a hacking projectile, I should have him doing that to flank the crab-like creature, and I also drew another ability of Buddy's, which is to lift extremely heavy stone blocks in order to flip switches and kill enemies. In the game, Buddy can't do both at the same time, but for a composition that's supposed to introduce this game's world, some of the characters, especially the most important ones, the ones that you're going to see the most often while playing the game, I thought showing both at the same time would inform people of what's in the game, as well as tell the story that I'm trying to tell in order to communicate with this image. It's also kind of showing you gameplay that you have to look forward to. It's at this point that I opened up Affinity Designer and started inking. And midway I realized I'm going to have to go back to Affinity Photo later on in order to create a grayscale painting. Now, I've said in the past that I don't like working with grayscale, but I haven't entirely given up with it. I'm thinking of a different approach. If I were to draw the scene and make it into a grayscale image and then draw actual colors, not with any blending modes or anything, but actual colors of a similar value and kind of tweak the saturation a little bit to the grayscale painting, just painting right on top of it with color and not just a color blending mode, it might actually turn out looking pretty good. I mean, I think a grayscale painting is a good little blueprint of how the lighting in the scene should come together. And so I kind of don't want to entirely abandon what I do like about a grayscale painting. While inking Nikolai's face, I had the opportunity to sift a few proportions around and add more detail to the image in general. It's kind of amazing how much time I spent on his face. Like every time that I work in Affinity Designer, I babysit the line weights really carefully, but I don't quite finish inking the image in this video. So I think some of the line weights will need to be adjusted bit by bit as more things are being contextually added into the scene. Like, for example, if I have an object off in the distance and I absolutely have to have its line thickness be a specific width, I can't have anything in the foreground with that same width. The things in the foreground have to have even thicker width to the line weight. I really like Affinity Designer's ability to sculpt lines because your thought process changes and you're perceiving the three-dimensionality of the image differently. So sometimes you can work through problems in the image differently than if you were just drawing lines on a flat surface. With Nikolai's page left foot, I gave it a really thick outline around its silhouette, and that's not going to change. It's the closest object to the imaginary camera that took this picture. So its silhouette needs to be thicker than everything else in the composition, even thicker than the rest of the silhouette of Nikolai. You can actually see me working out the shapes and forms of these objects much better and far more effectively than I previously had, because I'm sculpting it. And sometimes I really appreciate moving files over to Affinity Designer just simply because the sculpting gets me to kind of perceive the three-dimensionality of the scene more accurately. The details inside each silhouette of an object have thinner line weight than the silhouette itself. If the arm or leg is moving towards the imaginary camera, all or most of the body will have its silhouette taper in order to make it appear closer to the imaginary camera. I don't know if I'm making sense, but I hope I am. I gave Nikolai a really big gun, so much so that it might seem somewhat unrealistic. But he's got this power armor suit. So, at least to me, it makes sense that his gun would have this ungodly size and weight to it, because the power suit is probably helping him lift it to begin with. Who knows, maybe the gun is as light as a feather when he's wearing his power armor, and when he's not wearing the power armor, it's just too heavy to even try to lift. Okay, so now this portion of the suit I figured was the steam that you use in the game to avoid enemies and in order to double jump. For the gun blasts, Jack Kirby, he's a comic book artist, a very famous one who's no longer with us anymore. He used to draw in these little splotches of black, and people call it Kirby Crackle. When inking it, I thought that making perfect ovals all over the place would look good for that Kirby Crackle effect. But after a little while of working on it, it just seemed like this was the wrong approach. I realized it would take forever to make it look good, and in the end, I would still need to pull out my brush and refine the image with the brush. So there's no point in trying it with ovals if I'm just going to wind up pulling out the brush and the brush is going to do all of the heavy lifting, if that makes sense. So I deleted all of that and just started drawing it in. That had immediate results that I liked quite well. Inking the crab creature seemed to me to be the most straightforward part. I refined some parts of the inking line work. However, crabs tend to have a good amount of texture to their exoskeleton. So I didn't make super fine, smooth lines for him. His eyes are the funnest thing to work on this piece. I just made a perfect circle, converted it to curves, and I added these lips to function as eyelids, which would also form an angry expression. Occasionally I'd start refining the vector lines that I was drawing out on the crab creature and wound up deleting all that and kept reminding myself that a crab has lots of bumpy textures. So I pretty much just left as many of my raw, very flawed line work on the crab, just as is, because that's how a crab looks. It looks kind of gnarly. For the crab's page right arm, I could have redrawn the other pincher, but when I copied and rotated and changed some of the dimensions of the page left pincher, it seemed like it worked out rather well. I didn't immediately notice that there's just two of them of the exact same object right next to each other. I don't do that all of the time, but it was a bit of a shortcut. I was never happy with Nikolai's page left hand, so as soon as I pull in a reference later on to re-sketch the hand and ink it, I will, but I haven't quite gotten that far in drawing this image. So now I start inking Buddy, who has the most amount of detail going on in the least number of pixels. I decided that for some of my line work, I'd use a darker color, and I guess I'll see how well all of that blends in with the colors when I start actually coloring. Everything is subject to a bit of change here and there. I wanted Buddy to have a little bit of an action pose. I haven't seen him illustrated in an action pose, and I felt like that would totally be exciting. And so I tried to give him as much of an action pose as his weird spherical body and his, I think they're holograms for his arms and legs, as much as his spread out arms and legs can allow for an action pose. I kind of tried to work around that as best as I could. Some of the visuals on the box that Buddy is lifting into the air are inspired by imagery that I've seen inside of comic books ever since I was a little kid. Be it Magneto, Quasar, or Spawn, like I've seen this imagery thousands of times, and it's about time I started to kind of take my stab at doing the same thing. For Buddy's hack blast, I just used a series of squares randomly assorted but congested in one place. But I added 4 squares kind of heading out towards the perspective of the scene. So I'm hoping those 4 squares adequately communicate that this collection of squares are moving towards the camera. If not, I'll probably have to add a motion blur effect later on down the road in Affinity Photo, because that specific effect or filter or whatever is not available in Affinity Designer for some reason. This is when I started to work on the vines. When I sketched out the vines initially, I used some really thick lines so that when I would ink it, which is right now, I'm inking it on the screen right now, I could ink a line on either side of the sketch's thick line work. And I think that this actually worked out rather well, actually. And then the blue fruit. Some part of me says that they're just fruit that glows in the dark. Some other part of me tells me that these trees have eyes, and it might be what the gods in the game use in order to see what you're doing throughout the game. Okay, so this is how far I've gotten with this commission. So far, I think it's coming out nicely. I hope that you all participate with the art competition. If you wind up drawing your submission and posting it around online, if I may ask you a favor, could you please promote this art competition as well as OUTBUDDIES as well? If you could do it either with hashtags or direct links, then that would be much appreciated. I know Julian would appreciate that as well. There's an old saying,
"If you build it, they will come."
And it's a bold-faced lie. It's important that people know that the product exists, and when you've spent thousands and thousands of hours necessary to make a good game that harkens to the nostalgia of people's youth so effectively and in such an original way, I feel that that person should be rewarded for their hard work. And so if you could help promote his game when you make your art submission to this competition, that would be much appreciated. Anyways, guys, that pretty much concludes it for this video. If you guys enjoyed it, please feel free to like, share, and subscribe. And if you guys would like to get more notifications from me, or would like to have more involvement with my community, feel free to follow me on Twitter or join my Discord server. A link to both is in the video description below. If you'd like to support my channel, in the upper right corner of the screen, there's a picture of my mascot that leads to my Patreon. Any support would be much appreciated. And if you've enjoyed what you've seen, then feel free to click on anything that's appearing on the screen right now. Thank you very much for your time.